Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here at, as was mentioned, the first Envision conference in Europe. Just a little bit of background. You saw the video, but as far as who we are, the Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure, we were created by the American Society of Civil Engineers, which is the body for professional engineers within the U.S., the American Council of Engineering Companies, which represents the consulting companies, and the American Public Works Association, which represents infrastructure owners throughout the U.S. and Canada. So we have always operated with both the U.S. and Canada in mind. And then ISI, after it was created, partnered with Harvard University, the Zofnass Program for Sustainable Infrastructure, to create Envision, as we talked about. And then following that, we've partnered with ICMQ to deliver Envision here in Italy. So we're very excited. I mention that because it's important that where this came from is about consensus. It's about communication and collaboration, and that's really the value of these sustainability frameworks, is that we're all working together under the same guidelines, under the same definitions with a common language. That's really the value as we go through that I'll talk about. But I want to give a little bit of background for those of you who maybe aren't familiar with Envision, to give context to the rest of the day as to what is Envision. So it's a sustainability framework for all types of infrastructure. And again, that's very important because the value of that common language decreases if you have a separate system and a separate definition for every type of infrastructure project or every sector of infrastructure. So if you're an infrastructure owner, you may own and operate a variety of types of infrastructure. If you are communicating with the public, they're going to be dealing with all of these types of infrastructure. And even if you are on a project team, you will be working on different types of infrastructure. So the value in having a single system that can allow you to transfer seamlessly from one project to another, from one sector to another, and then to collectively evaluate and analyze infrastructure performance across sectors is incredibly valuable. And that was really the genesis of Envision. Infrastructure is incredibly complex. Sustainability is incredibly complex. So when we start talking about sustainable infrastructure, what does that mean? And we were seeing in the early days a lot of time and energy being wasted on every project just establishing what do we mean by sustainability for this project in this context. And then we're wasting that effort and repeating it on the next project. And it's a different definition, and we're starting all over again. So there's an incredible value in having a consistent framework that we're all working from and that can transfer from project to project. And these are just the components. The framework itself is an overarching system that we'll talk about. But there are key elements that give value. The manual itself, which is the framework, a pre-assessment checklist. So in infrastructure, we often find that critical decisions that impact the sustainability of the project are made very early in planning. And to have those concepts in a format that is simple and easy to use for early project development is incredibly important to set up the project for success down the road. Our mantra with Envision is it's not only about doing the project right, it's about doing the right project. And that's important for infrastructure. We also have our online tool, which simplifies the process, and our Envision Sustainability Professional Credential. And I think Lorenzo will talk about, but there are over 100 here in here in Italy. And I'll talk more. There's over 8,000 worldwide. So we're very excited about that. But that's the tool and the training to use Envision for the professionals. We also have our third-party review process and the award and recognition. So we'll talk about those. So here is the basic structure. It covers 5 categories of quality of life, which are the social and community impacts, culture, leadership, which is very important because so often with infrastructure projects, we start off with very high goals about what we are going to do and how sustainability is going to be incorporated. But throughout the timeline of the project, it either gets value engineered out of the project, it gets forgotten. These infrastructure projects have long timelines, and as we transition from one team to another, those goals and aspirations get lost. So having a strong commitment to incorporate sustainability is incredibly important, as well as long-term planning, as discussed previously, and the economic aspects. Also, resource allocation, very clear. Our materials, our energy, our water, we need to conserve those responsibly. The natural world and our environmental impacts, and then also climate and resilience, incredibly important. And please don't try to read this, but this is just to show you how the system unfolds underneath those 5 categories. 64 credits addressing different aspects of each of those. And again, it provides project teams a structured way of analyzing sustainability to walk through each one of these. And it's written in a very open and interdisciplinary way. So this is something that project teams can use to collaborate depending on their professional backgrounds. It's something that we often see project teams using to communicate with the public so that they can understand how the project impacts the social, environmental, and economic aspects of the community. That's incredibly important as well. And then one step down, underneath each of those credits then is the guidance on specifically what we are talking about, key concepts. How do you think about this in a constructive way? And even what are different levels of achievement, and you see you grow as you walk through the system. It's incredibly important. Buildings, and we're all familiar with sustainability in buildings, are very internal, contained. Infrastructure by its nature is external. It's about its impacts to the community, the far-reaching value of the network itself and the interconnectedness of the network. So assessing that is very important, and understanding those key concepts and establishing this scale that you can, each project, look at how you can improve one step further and increase the performance of the project. It's incredibly important. And so what are we seeing is the value of Envision? I've talked about a couple of them. Again, I really think that common language is incredibly valuable. We see it all the time. To be able to sit down, not only for the project owners, in the US, we often see in requests for proposals the establishment of Envision as the guiding framework for sustainability on a project, and that sets the point for the owners and the consultants to begin to communicate as to what they're going to do and how they're going to achieve. And they can even walk through Envision and establish certain goals and priorities that the project teams are going to achieve. So that's incredibly valuable as well. It's also about the collaboration on the project. What we see is when you start analyzing this, it requires an interdisciplinary approach. It requires different parts of the team to get together earlier than they maybe would have before. And that process of analyzing the different social, environmental, and economic aspects drives new ideas, innovation, efficiencies throughout the project. People who would not normally have been talking to each other are forced to talk to each other. And I've been lucky enough to sit in on some of the meetings, and people will say, well, usually when you're looking at it, they'll say, well, is this going to cost more? Is it going to cost the same? Or is it going to save us money? And if it's going to save us money, why haven't we already done it? And if it's going to be the same, then sure, why not? Let's do it more, sustainably. And then sometimes they'll say, well, if it's going to cost more, we're not really sure. But I've been in those conversations where they'll say, oh, this is going to cost more. And then someone else will say, well, actually, if we did it a different way, it wouldn't cost anything. And so things that we perceive as costing more or being not doable on a project can be overcome sometimes through this collaborative process. And then, of course, there is the recognition itself. For those projects that choose to go through the third-party verification, that recognition is valuable as well. And not only the award that comes at the end, which oftentimes the owners see as an important way to demonstrate to the community that they've added value in the project, that it's not just them saying, we've done this project for you, but a third party that has confirmed what we have done. But again, when you know that there will be a review at the end, it changes the dynamic of the project itself. Sustainability becomes a more important concern, and in that way it becomes even more about, not so much about the award at the end, but about good project management. And because you have established that review process, it improves the project management incredibly. And you see check-ins, more meetings, more tracking of information and documentation. And that's the value. I sometimes, when people say, well, we're not sure if we really want the award, I say, don't think about it as for a plaque. think about it as an investment in project management, and then they say, well, sure, of course, we want to do that. And so how can sustainability improve the project? Sometimes I spend a lot of time battling the perception that sustainability costs more. I don't think that is true at all. I think where that has come from is, as you see, this is I love this chart, you've probably seen it before, but throughout a project timeline, our ability to make change decreases, and the cost of making those change exponentially increases. And what happens too often in infrastructure development is that we design a conventional project to here, and then we decide, okay, now let's make it sustainable. And that's where we get this perception that sustainability costs more, because we've waited too long in the process to incorporate these ideas. And if we use these frameworks to begin to think about sustainability earlier, then we have the ability to make those changes with no additional costs. And we see that in a number of projects. It does not have to cost more. We also look at improving performance in different dimensions. So here, if you think of this as engineers like to think three-dimensionally, right? So I like this chart. We look at the project performance itself, which is our traditional, more energy reductions, more renewable energy, lower water consumption. But also, how did we arrive at that solution looking at the entire life cycle of the project? Again, this is incredibly important, that we're not just looking at initial capital costs or the initial design and construction. These infrastructure projects have incredibly long lifespans. How are we considering that? Not only the operations, but even the end of life of these infrastructure projects. That's important in arriving at the best solution. And then here, critically, our stakeholder collaboration. Who have we brought into this project? And again, the bigger you draw that circle around who are the real stakeholders in this project, the higher the value proposition is for sustainability, the better the outcomes will be, the more often you're finding multiple benefits on projects. And so that's an incredibly important aspect of what we're doing. So, sort of this is the envision by the numbers. What are we seeing? What are the impacts that this is having? Again, this is global Envision sustainability professionals, the credentialed individuals, over 8,000 now throughout the world, primarily in the US and Canada, but also here in Italy, and sort of smaller numbers in about 24 different countries that we're seeing, quite a few in Latin America. And this is important. I think it demonstrates that people are seeing this as a value. People are committing to this because they know this is coming. One thing that we were talking about is on the building side, sustainability has been there for many decades. We now have the Sustainable Development Goals. We also are looking at sustainable cities, and cities are concerned. We cannot achieve the sustainability or the Sustainable Development Goals without sustainable infrastructure. When you look at the 17 SDGs, 16 of them are connected to infrastructure in some way or another. So the focus on sustainable infrastructure, I think, is coming if it hasn't already arrived. And I think this is a sign that the industry and the professionals realize that that's coming, and we need to be prepared, and we within the industry need to be driving that as opposed to reacting to that demand. As far as verified projects, again, we have the numbers are constantly changing. It's now 75 since I put the slide together, but there are 75 verified projects. You'll see the largest is the water sector, but this is actually balancing out over the years. I think the trend there is that with water infrastructure, when you talk about social, environmental, economic impacts, it's just inherent to what water infrastructure does. They say, yes, we've been doing that for a very long time. But what's really interesting is the change of transportation now becoming a big sector as well, and energy. It looks small now, but we are seeing the biggest growth of our projects in energy. And it's not just renewable energy. We're seeing a variety of different energy projects. And we have within the US several utilities that use Envision on all of their energy infrastructure projects. And again, the value for them was the project management aspect, and then the demonstration to their ratepayers that they are delivering high-quality projects. It's very challenging with infrastructure to communicate with the public. They don't understand what we do. They don't see the projects. So tools like this can be a helpful way to visualize and to make the infrastructure real to the community and make them see what we're doing to improve their lives. It's incredibly important. So again, what does that translate? The 71 projects constitute about $20 billion US of infrastructure development. It's a fairly significant amount, but we also have now almost $30 billion of registered projects, so that's the upward trend. We're seeing a sharp increase in the projects pursuing verification, and we don't necessarily say that verification should be mandatory or on every project. We encourage the use of Envision on all projects because we think it's valuable, and the verification and the third-party review is just for those projects that find the value in that assessment. And so this is just one trend. And this is the distribution. I'm going to have to change my slides now because I'm excited we have the first project here in Italy. So I'll have to find a map that I can space out and show some more dots and some more colors. What I like to talk about, if you may or may not be familiar with American politics, if you're not, God bless you, you would expect to see this map on the left and the right, the coastal communities, which tend to be known as more progressive and sustainability being a more obvious concern, but it's not just these communities. We see big chunks in the center of the country, in the south, and throughout Canada as well, areas that maybe aren't known for being interested in sustainability, because at the infrastructure levels, infrastructure is a local issue. It's about counties and cities and communities, and they care about the environment, they care about their economy, they care about their communities. So I think that is a symbol here, that this is something that is widespread. And what's really exciting is you'll see here in Los Angeles County. Los Angeles County has 81 different cities, I think 81 or 86. So many I can't keep track. They are finding, and it's very difficult for the county governments to manage those. With Envision, so many of them have started adopting it. Again, that common language starts to add value, where now different government, different agencies have a common platform, and it improves the efficiency of what they're doing incredibly. So in the interest of time, I'm actually only going to talk about one project, but I think it's an important one. Coincidentally, it is a Stantec project. That was not intentional, but it's not a great picture. And again, I could do a different presentation on engineers and infrastructure projects and how we need to do a better job of photographing our projects and again, communicating that. This is a small water treatment facility, but the story here was important. It's a unique case where they had actually designed the facility without sustainability in mind entirely. They had entirely designed the facility, and it had come in about 30% over budget, which killed the project. They then started over with Stantec and incorporated sustainability in a new design. So in a very rare case, we had a conventional design and a sustainable design side by side in a true comparison. And the original non-sustainable project came in at $27 million, and the sustainable project for the same site came in at $20 million. So again, sustainability doesn't have to cost more when you think about it. And how they were able to achieve a lot of that savings was the conventional project was designing for the next 20 years, which by definition means you've got all of this capacity that you aren't going to use for a decade. The sustainable project was adaptable, resilient, used smarter technology, and therefore was able to deliver the capacity that the community needed as they needed it over time. And so was able to achieve those sustainability goals while also saving money. And so I think that's important. We were talking earlier, just before, as I wrap up my presentation, we've seen sustainability in the building sector. We are seeing now a push for cities and countries and the sustainable development goals. We are also seeing interest in the financial sector. Increasingly, investors are recognizing that it is a reputational risk as to what they are investing in. And they also want to demonstrate within their portfolio what is sustainable or not sustainable. So they are starting to look, it's still very early in my opinion, but they are starting to look at how do they assess and monitor and track the sustainability of their assets. And I think it's really important for us as an industry that we are leaders in that, and again, not reactionary, that those requests and those expectations are not being passed down to us, but that we are passing them up to say, this is what we are doing, and we actually know how to assess sustainability within infrastructure projects. So I just would leave you as something to think about throughout the day, that I believe this is coming one way or another, and we saw in the presentation before with the numbers that it's necessary. So how are we going to stay ahead of that? Thank you.